What if the story of humanity's beginning is not as simple or as complete as we have been taught? What if, before Eve ever walked in the Garden of Eden, there was another woman whose name was quietly pushed into the shadows of history? Her name is Lilith, and her story has lingered for centuries on the edge of scripture, legend, and silence. Across ancient texts and forgotten interpretations, whispers emerge of a woman created at the same moment as Adam, formed from the same earth, breathing the same divine breath. Unlike the familiar narrative passed down through generations, this version suggests that the first human relationship was not born in harmony, but in tension. Equality, freedom, and identity may have been at the heart of humanity's very first conflict. If Lilith truly existed, why was her story never placed at the center of tradition? Why does she appear only in fragments, hints, and echoes rather than in clear, accepted scripture? This mystery is more than a forgotten myth. It challenges how we understand power, obedience, and the voices that history chooses to preserve or erase. Lilith's name surfaces in ancient commentaries, mystical writings, prophetic imagery, and even timeless works of art. Sometimes she is portrayed as dangerous, sometimes as defiant, and sometimes as a symbol of independence far ahead of her time. Each retelling reveals as much about the storytellers as it does about Lilith herself. Tonight, we begin peeling back the layers of this hidden narrative. We will explore the contradictions in the creation story, the interpretations that unsettled ancient scholars, and the reason Lilith's legacy still sparks debate thousands of years later. This is not just a story about the past, it is a mirror reflecting questions that still shape our world today. If you are ready to question what you thought you knew about the beginning of everything, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. Let us step into the shadows together and uncover the story that was never meant to be forgotten. As we step deeper into this hidden chapter of humanity's origin, the mystery surrounding Lilith begins to take shape within the very pages of Genesis itself. The tension is not introduced by legend or folklore alone, but by scripture, quietly resting in plain sight. When we return to the opening lines of the Bible, we find not one, but two creation narratives placed side by side, each telling the story of humanity's beginning in a distinctly different voice. These accounts do not openly contradict one another, yet when read carefully, they raise questions that generations have struggled to ignore. In the first account, the language is vast and cosmic, as though the universe itself is holding its breath. God speaks, and humanity comes into being through divine command. Male and female appear together, formed in the same moment, bearing the same image, and standing equally before their Creator. There is no pause between them, no suggestion of hierarchy, no indication that one follows after the other. They emerge as a pair, complete and unified, sharing not only existence but dignity. This version of creation offers a powerful image of balance at the dawn of time, an origin rooted in togetherness rather than sequence. Yet almost immediately, the tone of the narrative shifts. The second account draws closer, slowing the pace and narrowing its focus. Instead of a sweeping proclamation, we see God shaping the first man from the dust, breathing life into him with deliberate care. Adam awakens alone in the garden, surrounded by abundance yet lacking companionship. The world is vibrant and alive, but something essential is missing. Only after this absence is recognized does the creation of woman unfold. She is not called into being by the same spoken command, but fashioned from Adam himself, drawn from his side while he sleeps. Placed next to each other, these two accounts feel like echoes that do not quite align. In one, man and woman stand together at the moment of creation, equal reflections of the divine. In the other, woman arrives later, formed from man, introduced as the answer to his solitude. The text does not pause to explain the difference, nor does it offer clarification. Instead, it leaves a space, a silence that invites interpretation. For some, these accounts are simply two perspectives on the same event. For others, that silence is where an older, forgotten story begins to emerge. Ancient readers noticed this tension and refused to dismiss it as coincidence. They asked how woman could be created, both alongside man and after him, both equal in origin and derived from his body. These questions were not born from rebellion, but from careful attention to the text itself. If the first account speaks of a woman created simultaneously with man, and the second describes Eve's later formation, then perhaps they are not describing the same woman at all. Perhaps the opening chapter preserves a memory that the second chapter reshapes. This possibility changes how the story unfolds. It suggests that before the familiar image of Eve standing beside Adam, there may have been another presence, one whose creation did not depend on Adam's body, and whose role was not defined by his need. The harmony implied in the first account, and the order established in the second, may represent two different visions of relationship, placed together without explanation, whether intentional or not. The contrast opens the door to the figure of Lilith, not as an invention, but as an attempt to reconcile a story that refuses to be simple. In this light, the creation narratives are no longer just theological statements. They become the foundation of a much deeper human struggle: equality and hierarchy, unity and separation, freedom and structure all appear at the very beginning. The silence between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is not empty. It is filled with questions that have echoed across centuries, quietly shaping the legends that followed and setting the stage for a story that would not remain buried forever. It was within this unresolved silence between the two creation accounts that ancient rabbinic thinkers began to linger, unwilling to pass over the tension as a simple narrative detail. For them, Scripture was not a collection of loose threads to be ignored, but a woven text where every inconsistency demanded reflection. If Genesis spoke twice about the creation of woman in ways that did not fully align, then perhaps it was not repetition at all, but remembrance. So, the rabbis asked a daring question. What if the woman described alongside Adam in the first chapter was not the same woman formed from his side in the second? This idea did not emerge from imagination alone, but from a close and reverent reading of the text. In the first account, man and woman appear together, called into being by the same divine command, shaped from the same earth, and infused with the same breath of life. Nothing in that passage suggests dependence or sequence. The woman stands beside the man, not behind him. Her existence neither delayed nor derived, for readers trained to weigh every word. This detail mattered. If equality was present at the very moment of creation, how could it simply vanish in the next chapter without explanation? To resolve this, some rabbinic traditions proposed that the first woman did not remain. She was created with Adam, equal in origin and stature, yet her story unfolded differently. This woman, later remembered as Lilith, was not formed from Adam's body, nor was she introduced to complete his loneliness. She existed alongside him from the beginning, sharing the same dust and the same divine intention. In this reading, Eve was not the first woman, but the second, brought into being after the first union had already fractured. The story of Lilith, as it developed in these interpretations, is not presented as a sudden rebellion, but as a gradual clash between two beings who were equal in creation yet incompatible in expectation. Adam, shaped within a world moving toward order and hierarchy, sought to establish authority. Lilith, born of the same ground and spirit, rejected any role that placed her beneath him. Their conflict was not merely personal, it reflected a deeper struggle over identity and balance. If both were created equal, then neither could command the other without breaking that original symmetry. This interpretation transforms the second creation account into a response rather than a replacement. Eve's formation from Adam's side is no longer simply a poetic detail, but but a deliberate restructuring of relationship. Where Lilith stood beside Adam as an equal, Eve would be bound to him in a different way, connected to his body and introduced within a clearer framework of unity and order. The garden, once marked by unresolved tension, becomes a place of renewed harmony, though at the cost of something lost and unnamed. What makes this reading so compelling is that it does not dismiss Scripture. It listens to it. It accepts both accounts as meaningful and seeks to understand why they coexist. Lilith becomes the echo of the first account, the memory of an equality that could not be sustained within the unfolding human story. Her absence from the main narrative is not proof of her insignificance, but evidence of how unsettling her presence would have been for later tradition. In this way, Lilith is not introduced as a villain or a symbol of chaos, but as a reminder of a path not taken. Her creation from the same dust as Adam anchors her firmly within the sacred story, even as her fate drifts into legend. She represents the question that lingers beneath the text. What happens when equality exists before structure and freedom before order? The rabbis did not offer this answer lightly. They left it as an interpretation, a shadowed truth that continues to challenge how we read the beginning of everything. As the rabbinic interpretations took shape, the figure of Lilith did not remain a quiet hypothesis lingering between the lines of Genesis. Over time, her story was given form and voice within Jewish folklore, most notably in a medieval text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. It is here that the earlier questions surrounding the two creation accounts are transformed into a dramatic narrative, one that attempts to explain not only why the first woman disappeared, but what became of her after she left the garden. In this telling, Lilith's conflict with Adam is rooted in the very nature of her creation. Formed from the same dust, awakened by the same breath, she saw herself as his equal in every sense. When Adam sought to assert authority over her, particularly within their shared life, Lilith resisted. To her, submission was not harmony, but a denial of the equality with which she believed she had been made. Their struggle was not portrayed as a moment of chaos, but as an unresolvable divide between two visions of partnership. Adam sought order through hierarchy, while Lilith sought dignity through balance. Unable to reconcile these differences, Lilith chose departure over surrender. Her exit from Eden is described not as exile, but as a decision made by her own will. In speaking the sacred name of God, she broke free from the garden and fled beyond its boundaries, leaving behind both Adam and the structure that could not contain her. This moment marks a turning point in her story. No longer a companion within creation, Lilith becomes an outsider, defined not by her origin, but by her refusal to remain where she could not stand as an equal. From this point forward, the tone of the narrative darkens. The folklore does not allow Lilith to remain simply a woman who walked away. Instead, her independence is gradually reshaped into something threatening and unsettling. Angels are sent to bring her back, not with violence, but with command. Yet even when confronted by divine messengers, Lilith refuses to return. Her defiance becomes absolute, and in that defiance, she accepts a new identity imposed by the fears of those who told the story. Lilith is transformed into a supernatural figure, one associated with danger at the edges of human life. She is said to dwell far from Eden, near desolate waters, occupying spaces untouched by order and safety. In this role, she becomes a symbol of everything that lies beyond control, a presence invoked to explain loss, uncertainty, and fear in a fragile world. Protective rituals and amulets emerge around her name, not as mere superstition, but as reflections of a society attempting to defend itself against the unknown. Yet beneath these darker portrayals, the original tension remains visible. Lilith is feared not simply because she is powerful, but because she cannot be governed. Her transformation into a supernatural threat mirrors the discomfort surrounding her initial refusal to submit. The folklore recasts her independence as danger, her autonomy as something that must be restrained. In doing so, it preserves the memory of a woman who would not bend, even as it reshapes her into a cautionary figure. This evolution of Lilith's image reveals more than a legend. It exposes the anxieties of the culture that preserved it. Her story becomes a boundary marker, defining what lies inside order and what exists beyond it. She stands at the edge of the human world, neither fully erased nor fully accepted, her presence lingering as a warning and a question. Is she a figure of rebellion that threatens stability, or a reminder of an equality that once existed and was lost? Through the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith's story gains clarity but also complexity. She is no longer just a possibility hidden between verses, but a character shaped by choice, conflict, and consequence. Her departure from Eden does not end her story. It begins a transformation that will echo through centuries of myth, fear, and interpretation, ensuring that her name, once spoken, can never fully fade back into silence. As Lilith's story drifted further from its origin in Eden, it did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it transformed, carried across generations by fear, imagination, and the human need to explain what felt uncontrollable. The woman who once stood beside Adam as an equal gradually became something far more unsettling in the collective memory. No longer remembered only for her refusal to submit, Lilith was recast as a presence that haunted the fragile boundaries of life itself, existing at the edges where order gave way to uncertainty. In later folklore, Lilith was associated with unseen dangers that lingered in the night, particularly around moments when human life felt most vulnerable. Birth, infancy, and sleep became spaces where her name was whispered with caution. Stories emerged describing her as a wandering force, blamed for sudden loss and unexplained tragedy in a world that lacked scientific answers. These legends were not born from cruelty alone, but from fear. In a time when survival was uncertain and grief often arrived without warning, Lilith became a symbol onto which those fears were projected. From this fear grew the tradition of protection. Amulets bearing sacred names and symbols appeared in households, worn or placed near beds and cradles. These objects were not expressions of devotion to Lilith, but defenses against her. They represented humanity's attempt to draw boundaries against the unknown, to claim some measure of safety in a world that felt constantly under threat. The persistence of these amulets, found by archaeologists centuries later, reveals how deeply her legend took root in everyday life, blurring the line between myth and lived experience. Lilith's shadow also found its way into scripture, though only briefly and cryptically. In the book of Isaiah, her name appears within a vision of desolation and judgment, describing a land so utterly abandoned that only creatures of chaos remain. There, Lilith is not introduced or explained. She simply appears, resting among ruins and wild beings of the night. Her inclusion is striking precisely because it is so sudden. To the ancient audience, her name needed no explanation. It carried with it an immediate sense of dread, reinforcing the image of a world turned upside down. Yet even this scriptural mention is marked by ambiguity. Some translations soften her presence, rendering her as a night creature or bird rather than naming her directly. This uncertainty reflects the discomfort surrounding her figure. To name Lilith was to acknowledge a myth that existed alongside sacred text, neither fully embraced nor entirely erased. She remained suspended between belief and metaphor, a shadow that could be reshaped depending on who told the story. Art became another vessel through which Lilith's image evolved. During the Renaissance, when artists revisited biblical stories with new symbolic depth, echoes of her legend resurfaced in unexpected ways. In certain depictions of the fall of humanity, the serpent is no longer a simple creature, but a figure with a human face, often feminine, entwined around the tree. This imagery suggests a tempter who is not distant or alien, but familiar, intimate, and intentional. while not explicitly named. The resemblance to Lilith is difficult to ignore. These artistic choices did not arise in isolation. They reflect centuries of storytelling in which Lilith was linked to temptation, autonomy, and danger. By blending her traits into the serpent, artists layered the fall of humanity with deeper psychological tension. Temptation became not only an external force, but a reminder of a past conflict, a return of what had been cast out. In this way, Lilith's legend continued to live, even when her name was left unspoken. Through scripture, folklore, and art, Lilith became more than a character. She became a symbol, shaped by fear, fascination, and unresolved questions about freedom and control. Each generation reinterpreted her according to its own anxieties, ensuring that her presence endured. Though her form changed, her essence remained the same, a figure who existed beyond boundaries, refusing to be fully contained, lingering in the spaces where certainty ends and imagination begins. In the modern world, Lilith's story has taken on a meaning very different from the one shaped by ancient fear and folklore. As societies began to question long-standing traditions and re-examine voices that had been pushed to the margins, Lilith emerged once again, this time not as a figure of dread, but as a symbol of independence and self-definition. What was once portrayed as rebellion began to be understood as resistance, and what had been framed as danger came to be seen as the cost of refusing to surrender one's identity. For many contemporary readers, Lilith represents the enduring struggle between authority and freedom. Her refusal to submit is no longer viewed solely as a disruption of order, but as an assertion of equality in a world that demanded hierarchy. She becomes a mirror reflecting questions that still shape modern life. Who defines our roles? Where does obedience end and self-respect begin? And what is lost when voices are silenced in the name of harmony? Through this lens, Lilith is no longer a shadow haunting the edges of history, but a presence that challenges the foundations of power itself. This reimagining does not erase the darker aspects of her legend. Instead, it reframes them. The fear once attached to Lilith reveals how unsettling independence can be to systems built on control. Her transformation into a threatening figure in earlier traditions now appears less like a reflection of her nature and more like a response to her defiance. In reclaiming Lilith, modern interpretations expose how stories are shaped by those who tell them, and how easily autonomy can be recast as danger when it disrupts established order. At the heart of Lilith's modern meaning lies the question of identity. She stands for the courage to define oneself rather than accept a role assigned by others. Her story resonates with anyone who has felt pressure to conform, to shrink, or to remain silent for the sake of peace. Lilith's choice to leave Eden, once framed as a fall into darkness, can now be read as a step into self-ownership, even when the cost was isolation and misunderstanding. Yet her legacy is not about rejecting connection or community. It is about insisting that unity without equality is not true harmony. Lilith's journey reminds us that freedom and belonging must coexist, or else one will inevitably be sacrificed. This tension, first imagined at the dawn of humanity, remains deeply relevant in a world still grappling with questions of dignity, voice, and justice. As we bring this story to a close, Lilith remains what she has always been, a figure who refuses to disappear. Whether seen as myth, symbol, or reflection of human struggle, her presence invites us to look again at the stories we inherit and ask whose voices are missing. Thank you for spending this time exploring this powerful and unsettling legend with me. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join the conversation. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and together, we continue uncovering the forgotten truths that still shape who we are today.